Our world values grasping power, but it does not value the giving of power. It values being strong, but it does not value the giving, the rendering of strength. It values the exaltation and the self-expression, the expression of the self. It doesn't value the taking of that self and bringing it and giving it to another. It turns out that God's values are incredibly different to our modern ways. It turns out that heaven's rewards are given on a completely different basis compared to this world's rewards. Truth in 10-ish in 3, 2, 1. What is a woman? We considered last time that in Genesis chapter 1 verse 27, it is revealed to us that God made human beings male and female according to a gender binary. Of course, something that's apparent from creation ever since. So we answered the question then, what is a man? Today we answer the question, what is a woman? A woman is an adult human female. That's the easy part of the answer. But the question arises immediately, is there not something more to womanness? Is there something about a woman's nature that is womanly? Is there a thing called femininity? Now, we know that there is. I think we know that a woman is not simply the sum of her biological pieces, as we know that about a man as well. And that's the kind of extra detail that is given to us in Genesis 2 and 3 when the woman is commissioned with certain tasks as the man was, and these tasks are her creation mandate. And her creation mandate is what she's asked to do, but it's important to note, and it's clear from the reading in Genesis 2, that God made her expressly to do those things. So they are in harmony with who she is, her biology, her psychology, and so forth. So, the obvious result is that as we find out what she is made to do, we find out also what she is like. There is one word which God uses in Genesis 2 which captures all of this, and it is helper. That is spoken directly from God. And in Genesis 3, another important word is added, and that is mother, and it comes from the name Eve. Let's look at those because they teach us a great deal. That Hebrew translated helper is the word azer. And one of the closest English words to its meaning is one that we just don't use because it's antiquated and it sounds strange. But really a close match is the word succor, S-U-C-C-O-U-R, or in American spelling it may just be an O-R. And it sounds weird, but its meaning is very beautiful. It means to render strength, enablement, support, and aid, to bring, to provide, to render strength, enablement, support, and aid. And it also may contain suggestions of forming an alliance. So a woman is a human being with a really unique quality. She's gifted with what it takes to give herself to the strengthening of others. Actually, we see this in a subtle point made here too. There's a subtlety in Genesis 2 where she is made with a mandate that is firstly actually towards another person. In that case, it's Eve towards Adam. And notice that interpersonal orientation. If you think about this for a minute, it's quite a hated thought today because we live in a world where self-advancement and individual power and independence are sort of the things that are highly coveted. And if you watch the culture, you'll see that those sorts of things are actually preached especially to young women. Our world values grasping power, being powerful, but it does not value the giving of power. It values being strong, but it does not value the giving, the rendering of strength. It values the exaltation and the self-expression, the expression of the self. In fact, that's a big part of sort of how we like to live these days. But it doesn't value the taking of that self and bringing it and giving it to another. It values being first, but it doesn't value being second. It turns out that God's values are incredibly different to our modern ways. And that demands our attention in itself. It turns out that heaven's rewards are given on a completely different basis compared to this world's rewards. And Scripture uses this word that's behind all this, help or succor, to describe femininity. So it's no wonder that it matches generally, not just with what Scripture teaches, but with the findings even of modern psychology. We know, for example, that women have special abilities and special interests in the interpersonal realm. Think of the phrase, a woman's intuition. Why does that exist? Well, it has a basis in reality. We have experience of it. There's an interpersonal antenna that's finely tuned, and women tend to be very good at having faculties that understand people in a way that actually sees past the words that they may speak, that can anticipate needs and meet them, can discern deficiencies and weaknesses and intercede for them, can see anxieties below the surface and comfort them. They can be interpersonal strength-giving, nurture-giving pillars of help. One thing I've noticed in all my travels, in all my interactions and speaking, when I meet with so many people, is that there is actually a clear difference of interest between the sexes. It's the same and yet it's different. You see women expressing questions and queries and conversation in a way that is really betraying an interest in the person in a way that doesn't come through in men. And maybe that's why women's novels have sort of relationships and the interpersonal dynamics at the center of the story. You think of something like a Jane Austen or a Pride and Prejudice. He likes her, he doesn't like her, she doesn't like him, now they like each other again. Phew, they all live happily ever after. It's a relationship story. Men's books tend to be about missions and conquests and things. And that's just no surprise because God made us male and female. He made us in a certain way in order to suit us to do certain things. That's the first word, helper. Here's the second word, mother. And I think I can say this. I think that there's nothing about women that God has endorsed more than motherhood. I wish more women's conferences and Bible studies made that point more openly and freely and clearly. The first endorsement of motherhood is very early in the Bible. It's in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, where God announced that Satan's head would be crushed through a mother's child. Sin and death, God said, will end. That's the grand plan for the cosmos. And in his first announcement of that plan, the proto-evangelium, the first gospel, he places humble, forgotten, selfless, and often despised motherhood right there. It's the first thing he said about his plan. This verse establishes a broader rhythm in history as well, though. I mean, you can look at the account of the scriptures and you see that the seed of the woman, to use the phrase in Genesis 3:15, becomes the hope of the earth. The worst moments in biblical history, from the long anarchy of the days of the judges to the enslavement of the people of God in Egypt to the 400 silent years at the end of the Old Testament when the people are longing for a Messiah, each of them ends with what? A motherhood story. Hannah prayed for Samuel, who ended the days of the judges. Jochebed hid her child in the bulrushes, and that's why he grew up with Pharaoh and ended the days of slavery. John the Baptist leapt in Elizabeth's womb. Mary's visited by an angel. These divine interventions to make mothers. And we see through history that the prospect that every child born could be his mortal foe that would fulfill that promise to crush his head plagued Satan. And that is why he provoked demented evil against children. You think of Herod and Pharaoh, for example, both initiated massacres at those moments I just described, massacres of children. And it continues today, because whilst the next child born might not be Jesus, he's already come, it could still be Satan's next powerful enemy, standing against wickedness and promoting salvation in the new generation. I've often wondered whether that fear that he's always had is now amplified by a desire for revenge. Because, it did happen. Jesus did crush his head. And what an insult that must have been to the Prince of Angels, mighty in power, swollen with pride, to be undone by a plan which involved a young, diminutive, poor, powerless Jewish woman, a mother. And there is a great revenge being exacted against mothers and children. Perhaps that is why there is an all-out deranged assault on this kind of femininity and feminine calling from every single angle today. I mean, I could do a whole talk just on I mean, how many ideas are alive and well today in the West, even in the church, which undermine all of this, which relegate it to the sidelines? I could speak for hours on it. For more and more women, this just isn't a top priority in our culture. The belief is that this deprives her of her self-fulfillment and her true empowerment. She'll give herself to animals and fur babies before children. She'll give herself to a boss and a corporation before she gives herself in other contexts like a family or a marriage. She will pursue sexual liberation and live young and free until she hits her mid-30s and realizes that she had forgotten what is most important. And you can barely even find a women's Bible study to address it. And I haven't even touched on the worst stuff like abortion, for example, and the fact that most transgenderism, statistically speaking, is among young women. Satan is alive and well, and he still hates femininity because it killed him, and it continues to oppose him in a way that strikes fear and revenge into his heart. A final thought before I finish. For both this topic and the what is a man topic last time, it seems apparent that the most direct context for these qualities which are spoken of in Genesis is marriage. And I think women feel this most acutely because the question often comes back to me, what about me, a single woman, a woman unable to have children? What can I do? And it's important to note a couple of things. The short answer is, well, you can do pretty much anything, obviously all subject to God's will and providence and wisdom and prudence. And maybe there are some things which really are opposed to femininity altogether, but not many. But note that these words are commissioning words. They're good words. They're words to be valued and taken incredibly seriously, but they're not the final words. They're not hard limits. But I want us to consider the quality also called femininity, which we call femininity, which really lies behind these words. The nature of a woman which is articulated in a word like helper. She's not necessarily married, but she has a gifting which aligns with those qualities we've already mentioned in this segment. And she may do many things in life, but it would be a mistake to entirely forget the unique thing that her femininity brings into this world, which no amount of masculinity will ever compensate for. This world is a whole world of people and a whole world of children. And there are so many things that you can identify today which are your help to the ones that God has brought to your attention.